question for the audience. If you have a podcast, like truly, I'd love to know what platform you use to record on, because we just had a whole conversation about the platform that I use and the platform that Jessica uses and pros and cons. I'll leave it there.
Pros and cons. Let me tell you, in my day, because I've been in this industry for quite a while. So when I started Interview Connections and I started podcasting and everything, and I started the company in 2013, 2014 is when I started my podcast. We were on Skype. We walked uphill both ways to school.
In the snow and the rain and the freezing everything.
Yes. It was all Skype, audio only. And so now we're like, we have all these different tools and these different platforms. And I'm like, you know what? Back in the day, we just used Skype. There was one thing, or instant teleseminar. You either wanted good quality or bad quality. You had two options, and those were your options. And now there's like, you could have bad quality, but so many different ways.
That's really what we're working with here. Did you use Skype and like something called Call Recorder?
Sure. Yeah. Cam, what was it? I think it was like Cam something.
Yep. And then you'd put it through like Audacity or something, and then you'd do all the things. There was like a bunch of like stuff that you did and you weren't sure if it actually made it better or not, but you did all the things.
For sure. Yeah. I hired a podcast editor because I started my podcast. I recorded an episode, and you know, my business was brand new. So I'm like, I don't want to spend a lot of money on a producer. And I downloaded GarageBand or Audacity, I think at the time. And I'm like, well, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And so I had been introduced to someone named Corey Coates, who has a company called Podfly. And I was like, oh, can you edit my podcast? He's like, I'll do an episode for free. And then we became best friends. And so, yeah.
Hot tip. Don't ask for free editing, but if they offer it, you may accept.
Yeah. I don't think Corey does it anymore, but we were both starting our businesses around the same time. So he showed me what he could do. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be your client.
Do you still work with him today?
I don't host a podcast anymore. We did it for 9 years, but he's still one of my best friends. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Might I ask, what was the turning point for you in not continuing with your podcast?
Yeah, great question. So we had our podcast for 9 years and did pretty much like weekly episodes, and just reached a point where, I mean, it is expensive to have a podcast, you know, probably $1,000 a month minimum to have it edited and everything. And we just felt like we said everything there was that we needed to say through our own podcast. And so we switched gears to just putting all of our efforts into guesting on other shows. But
Awesome.
I still leverage the interviews or the episodes, because that's the thing about having a podcast is it's all evergreen content. So there's still podcast episodes that I did in 2020 that I still, you know, share with people and post and stuff like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like a legacy builder, right? Like you have all of this content. You've shared so many things in so many places. And I love that you kind of found that loophole of like, we love to podcast still and share our stories, but we will use other people's audiences and networks and shows. And I think that's, I mean, I'd love for you to share how impactful that is as a marketing strategy, much more than your own, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many pros. I won't even say pros and cons, because there's benefits of both having your own show and being a guest on podcast. The book I put out in 2016, my God, it's been forever, but I self-published a book in 2016 called Interview Connections, How to Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic. So I've done a lot of speaking and talking about the benefits of both hosting because there's a ton of benefits and power in hosting your own show. I mean, you get to bring on all these different people, build relationships with all these different people. Whereas if you don't have your own podcast, you don't really have a platform on which to just invite people to have conversations with you that you can strategically network with and become your clients, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many benefits, but we reached a point where we felt like we said everything there was needed to be said, but also in the scope of our business, right? We both run agencies. You know, you get to these points where you're like, where do I need to put resources? And podcasting is such a branding tool. It's not necessarily something that pays off immediately. We kind of put a pin in the podcast when we were in a point in our business that we had to focus on, lead gen, closing sales, building the team. And we still may bring the podcast back to life. That's the thing about having a podcast. You have the RSS feed. You could just start posting new episodes literally anytime. I've seen people do that. They're like, yeah, I stopped my podcast a few years ago, but I'm going to start it again. Like that's always available to you too. But being a guest is great because it gets you visibility to different people's audiences and, allows you to build relationships with other people. And I truly enjoy experiencing other people's dynamics and styles and personalities. Like I was telling you before in the green room chat about a show I did on Tuesday, which was like a very different experience. And you and I are just like, we're hitting it off. We're laughing and everything, which is like my favorite thing, because sometimes I get on a podcast and it's like a little bit stiff and we're kind of not like, we're like, okay. But then sometimes you're just like, okay, we're like, we totally get along. Like there's just an instant energy match. And that's so fun.
Totally. What a weird thing, right? Like we've somehow in the last, especially 4 or 5 years, kind of figured out how to build rapport virtually, which is so different than doing it in person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's great. I mean, it's so funny to think like with podcasts, you have this opportunity to just have a networking conversation with somebody for 30 to 45 minutes. Whereas if you go to a conference and you're networking in person, maybe you're talking to someone for a few minutes before you're like, I'm going to go talk to that person now. Like you have like a lot of these like very quick conversations, but you get on a podcast and you're in it. There is a plan. There's a format that is bringing you through a whole conversation where you both walk out of that conversation knowing each other pretty well. And there's so much value in that. I mean, so many business owners want scale. They want as big as audience as possible. But business is built through really deep quality connections, one relationship at a time. And so that's why I love podcast guesting, is because every host you talk to, that's a host that took probably 30, 45 minutes getting to know you. And they now know you really well. There's so much value in that.
Yeah, it's to your point. I mean, you're doing this really in-depth networking call with the host and anybody that listens to the episode. So it's like this beautiful trickle effect of spreading, your message, your business, you're attracting leads almost like by accident, because people are listening to you talk about your business from your mouth, which is so different from like reading the copy on your website or looking at your social media. It's a much more intimate experience with somebody who's you may never meet face to face, right? It's like such a trip.
Exactly. And leveraging and using podcast episodes with potential clients is one of my favorite ways to repurpose podcasts. I like, because a lot of people think, oh, it's just visibility. I'm just, broadcasting out to this audience. But when you take the finished episode and send it to somebody before a sales call and said, hey, can you listen to this before we meet? I mean, I just closed a sale today. She heard me, like I sent her a podcast episode. I was like, hey, can you listen to this? And so one of the things that I talk about a lot in podcasts is audience sizes, because one of my biggest objections or obstacles in the sales process is like, how big are the audiences? Will you book me on shows with big audiences? And so a lot of times in podcasts, I'm addressing that obstacle head on. I'm talking about how audience size isn't public. It's not the question you should be asking. You should be focusing on your relationship with the host. And so because I had talked about that in the podcast that I sent to her, she literally said, I had written down, I wanted to ask you about audience size. And then I heard you talk about that. And so I'm crossing that question off of my list.
Work smarter, not harder.
And I'm like,
amazing.
Thank you very much. Where is your credit card?
I hadn't ever thought about that.
Yeah. So think about, what are the obstacles you get in the sales process? What are the questions that literally every prospect is asking? And if you start making content about that, talking about in podcasts, send those podcasts to your leads before the call and say, like literally say in the confirmation email, I'm going to learn about you and your business before our call. Like I'm going to do my homework. And I say, please also learn about interview connections. Like if we both come to this call prepared, we will get a lot done. We will come to a decision, because that's the goal of sales, is just to come to a decision. I want leads, not necessarily always say yes. That would be great. I want them to decide, is this a yes or a no? And so coming to the call prepared is the key to being able to decide by the end of that 20-minute consult. And by listening to a podcast episode before the call, we can get to that point of clarity and decisiveness so much easier.
I love so sales, many things about this. Oh my gosh. We should dig deep into this, because most people say I hate sales.
Oh my God,
when
I love it
really,
so much.
as an entrepreneur, I'm so sorry, but you're like 90% of your business is you in sales. Yeah. But it's not like selling things that you don't believe in, which I think is what that whole I hate sales trauma is about.
Mhm.
This to me is like pure genius on so many levels, because like to your point, when somebody comes to a sales call, the goal is for them to arrive intending to buy and just needing like the last little nudge, right? But if you're not
Yes.
going to jump on a call when you're like, I really don't think I'm going to work with this person,
Right.
right? You're going to cancel the call. And
Exactly.
what a beautiful filter a podcast episode could be, because they'll get to know your personality.
Mhm.
They'll get to hear the passion behind your voice about what you're talking about and the service you provide. You're going to answer their questions. And this is a new sort of like aha moment for me. When you deliver that to somebody as a podcast episode, it shows that you're not recording a video to like give them the do's and don'ts of working with you that's specific to a client. You're saying like, this is value that I've created for my audience, and it can also help us in our conversation. Like, what?
Exactly. Like a lot of business owners you have your sales funnel, you have a deck, maybe you have a video that people can watch before the call. Thank you for booking a call with me. And that whole process, and there's nothing wrong with those steps. But the thing is, when your leads are going through those steps, when they're reading your deck, when they're going through your one page, or when they're watching a video that you made speaking to them as somebody that booked a call, they are probably not believing a lot of what you're saying because they know that you're selling to them. And that could be subconscious, right? But they're now in a sales dynamic where there's like a kind of a dance that's happening. When you have them listen to a podcast, they're now listening to a podcast. There's no pressure. There's no weird sales dynamic. You're giving free value, free content. You're having a conversation with a host. You're being positioned as an expert, as an authority, and you can deliver a message that isn't in this context of like, I'm trying to sell to you. And I want to give you a quick example of this because this is so big. So I'll give you another example. Like people will ask like, oh, can I cancel? Because we are like, our clients sign a contract. It's a program. Oh, what if I want to refund? What if I want to cancel? And there's one way that I answer that question. If I'm talking to someone one-on-one on a call, but then if I could do a video about it, I'm like, I'm not afraid of hurting anyone's feelings because this is just a video to the world of like, and so I can really deliver it without being like, I don't want to say the wrong thing or offend them because, I still want to close this sale. So you can take these questions that you get on sales calls, but do a video about it, do a podcast about it. And then you can have people listen and know that you're not just talking to them, but like you are talking to them. So yeah, make content, use podcasts to speak directly to the obstacles and the objections that you get in the sales process.
Gosh, this is genius. Thank you.
Work smarter, not harder.
Totally. And if you're a podcast host, if you are always like, what am I going to talk about in my next episode? Here's like 3 episodes worth of content, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's like an FAQ on video.
Exactly.
And
that's how I teach people how to write their podcast one sheet, because the podcast one sheet is the PDF that you send to podcast hosts when you want to be on their show and you say, here's what I could talk about. Here are some of my topics and questions. And if you're like, well, what do I put on my one sheet? I tell business owners, list out what are the FAQs? What do your prospects always ask you about? What do you talk to your clients about? What do you teach them? What if they knew something, if they understood a topic better, would make them buy more easily? What do you need to educate them on? And have your topics and questions be around those areas. And that will set you up for success so much more when you're a guest.
Brilliant. Let's talk about being a guest on a podcast, because that is the cornerstone of your business, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. And like just something like I have always loved this conversation, because so many people, so we're a web design agency, and there is a common misconception that once you have a website, people will find you. And it's like the next step of that conversation is educating our clients and just people on like really the only way to know if your website is converting is to get traffic there. Oh, how do I get traffic there? Well, organic or paid, right? Like those are kind of the 2 options that we have. And I feel like podcasting is the unicorn that sits outside of those 2 categories and is insanely impactful, not just for conversion, but as a small business, as somebody who has probably created a business around something that you love, something that you're passionate about. you have that calling to do what you do, you get to share from your heart with somebody who is asking you questions. And a lot of times we don't have content of ourselves talking about our business. And so to be able to have that, and then now that we know, we can also send that to people and share it with our leads. Like this as a marketing tool. Oh my gosh. Let's talk to me about leveraging other people's audiences and why you love what you do so much.
Okay. Well, I am going to talk about that, but I also want to touch on the website stuff. I love that you have a web design agency because all that you just talked about is huge. And I want to talk about SEO for a minute.
Oh, please. Love that.
So, I mean, we've got small business owners in the audience, so you may or may not know, but just to break down search engine optimization, right? If you want people getting to your website, if you want people finding this beautiful website that Pua and her company has just made for you, you need to drive traffic to it. You need people to find it on Google. People are not going to find it on Google if there's no content on the website. And I don't mean like, obviously there's gonna be content, but like the more you're posting content. So what I do on my website, when I have a podcast appearance, I add it to my website as a blog post. And then I'll, embed their MP3 player and all that. So my podcast appearances are content that's going on my website. When I'm a podcast guest, that host is probably putting a backlink to my website. So now Google is seeing, wow, she has a lot of new content posted on her website. Other people are talking about her. Other people are linking to her website, so that when people Google how to get on podcasts, podcast guesting, stuff like that, Interview Connections is pretty high up in the search result. We also run Google Ads, but that's like a separate conversation. So, the more of a footprint you have on the internet, and that's really the key to getting more website traffic, is having a bigger footprint online. You got, where can you have a footprint? LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, so all the social medias, blog posts, podcasts, YouTubes, like anywhere on the internet that you can put your website link, you can put your content, you can put your face, you can put everything. Podcasts make it really easy to do that because you're getting a whole episode description, a blog post about the episode, you're having the video, everything.
Totally.
So that's the SEO part. It's going to get you more traffic to your website. And you're also going to be able to give a call to action. So let's say you've got a great lead magnet that everyone wants. Put up a little landing page, put up an opt-in box on your website. And at the end of the interview, say, hey, if you want whatever the lead magnet is, go to my website and opt in and you'll get it. And so now you have everyone going to your website. They're opting into your email list. You get, this is how you grow.
I hope you all wrote this down. And if you didn't, pause, rewind, and rewind. Do people say rewind anymore?
I think so.
Go back. It's such a cassette tape term.
Yes.
Right? VHS. Beautifully said. And I recently did a podcast episode with a woman named Bernadette Marciniak. She owns Soul House Media, and she's a photographer and videographer. She told me, and I didn't know this, video, because YouTube is owned by Google, having YouTube videos on your website actually increases your SEO because right? Do you know that? I didn't know that.
Yes. So, and YouTube videos are also really good for your SEO because Google owns YouTube. When somebody searches, your name, your business, the video, because, there's a video there, you can click, all news, images, videos, all of your podcast appearances are going to show up in the video section of the Google search results. So my client, Christina Woods, is a great example. So if you Google Christina Woods hypnotherapy, that first page of Google is all her podcast appearances, her social media, her website, all the YouTube videos that come up are her as a guest on podcasts. So and she's been working with us for years and has really just skyrocketed her business from less than 6 figures to multiple 6 figures. She was featured on Brains magazine on the cover on their podcast. It's all from consistent podcast guesting, honing in her message, being consistently visible, giving a strong call to action. There's so many benefits that come from podcast guesting, but you've got to be consistent, because the big mistake that people make with podcasting and guesting alike is they try it for 6 months or less and they call it if they don't make it big in that amount of time. But this is a slow burn. It can be a quick burn. You can get a quick win, but it's typically something that really builds a very strong foundation and a business that is quite bulletproof. Because one of the reasons that Interview Connections is the leading agency for podcasts is that we've been around for 11 years and we have so many backlinks. We have so much content. We have we have what nobody else has, which is 11 years of experience and activity on the internet talking about podcasts. So, like someone could come in today, but they can't buy 11 years worth of experience and content and backlinks and domain authority and all of that. But in order to get that, you have to start and you have to stick with it long term.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. I definitely understand the consistency game for your own content. Tell me more about why it's so important to be consistent on someone else and guesting on someone else's podcast.
Yeah, I mean, number one, you've got to hone your message and you have to practice. Like we were kind of chatting about before the show started, like I just love everyone's different styles. Like every time I'm on a podcast, every host has a different style. They have a different way of doing things. They have a different way of running their show. So it actually makes, for me to do 3 to 4 interviews every single month on different people's podcasts, I become a much better guest because of the practice of being on different people's podcasts. When you host your own show, like you get practice interviewing different people, but it's always your show, right? Like you know how things are run. But when you're a guest, like you're constantly improving, you're constantly responding, which is fun because I don't know if you know human design, but I'm a generator. So I live to respond. You're like, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, anything. I'm here to respond. Like it's where I get my energy
exactly how
from.
our conversation went.
Exactly. So you're going to hone your message over time. You're going to think of different ways to say things, and then it's going to hit you. You're like, oh, that's perfect. I'm going to keep saying it that way. And people need to hear you multiple times. Like, they sometimes need to hear on this podcast and then see you again on this podcast and see you post consistently. If you just post a couple podcast appearances over the course of a month, it's like, oh, that's cool. And then they don't hear from you again, but you have to be. That's the thing about marketing. It's all about consistency. And like, I'm a big fan of Alex Hormozi. I've been listening to his podcast like religiously. It's so valuable. And he has this podcast episode that's like, you need to keep marketing because people don't know you exist or something like that. And just when you think, oh my God, I feel like I've sent so many emails, so many texts, so many posts, people are they don't care. They're like, oh, that's cool. They're in their own world. Like you just need to keep shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Like people are so self-absorbed and that's fine. Like we are all the main character in our own movie. So if you want to get noticed, you have to make yourself you have to get people to notice you.
For sure. The least favorite words any introvert wants to hear, but sorry.
I will say podcast appearances are the safest way for introverts to get visible by thousands of people because you could do it from home. You're having a one-on-one conversation. You can block your calendar before and after. So when the interview's done, you can go recharge.
Totally.
So it is the best strategy for introverts, in my opinion.
That I'm going to create an entire post around this.
Yes.
I think that's what we need to hear is like, yes, it's important for you to get out in front of people, for them to hear you talk, for you to share your message, and it's safe.
Right, exactly. And I will say, even for extroverts, if you're not used to being a guest on podcasts, like anything that's going to get you outside visible to a lot of people that you don't know yet, that don't know you yet, it will feel a little bit threatening. It will feel a little bit scary. For some, it may feel like a very real threat. And for others, it just kind of might make you a little nervous and like, what's going to happen. But the more you do it, the easier it feels. I have got clients that sign on and they're so nervous. They're sweating. They're all nervous. And I'm like, listen, you do a handful of these, you're gonna be like, oh, no big deal. Like, I know this. Let's go.
Totally. I mean, I still sweat. I am really sweady right now. So
you're also in Hawaii. I'm sure it's just hot there. That actually brings me because my first podcast appearance was actually, I was interviewed by Ronald Allen, who, funny enough, I just made this connection because I'm like, who was my first podcast interview? And he is still on my email list. We had a call like just a few months ago. I have to reach out to him, being like, do you remember you were the first podcast host to interview me. But anyway, he interviewed me on my podcast before I started Interview Connections. I was a virtual assistant and he interviewed me about starting a business as a mom. And it was summer. And I didn't have air conditioning. I was very hot. So I get it.
Totally. I mean, you make it work, right? And now we have filters. We have AI. Like, you got no excuse, people.
Exactly.
Amazing. Do you have any advice to people who are really inspired by this conversation? And they're like, okay, you've convinced me. I'm in. I'd love to get on podcasts. Just hire Jessica's team, first of all.
Yes.
So we can just like, she'll make your life so easy. And what are some tips that you have for people to be great podcast guests?
Yes. So definitely go to interviewconnections.com and just book your consultation call. That's step one. We will get you
send
booked.
them a podcast that talks about this.
Exactly. Yeah. So get booked. But how to be a great podcast guest? I mean, it's all about being a good conversationalist. This isn't a TV appearance. It's not a radio spot where you need to give, like, radio shows are scheduled to the second. You need a concise answer. It doesn't take an insane amount of media training to be a good podcast guest. The best podcast guests are ones that are there to serve the audience and the host, that are go with the flow, that are there to like provide value, are there to have fun, and are present with the conversation, who have good stories to share. One tip that I'll give to be a good guest: know when to put a period at the end of your sentence.
Oh my God, you're speaking to me.
Because a lot of people will just ramble and ramble and ramble, and they don't know when to give a powerful ending to what they're saying. So like, say what you need to say and then put a period at the end of your sentence.
I'm writing this down. This is why I prefer not to do solo episodes, because that is like a train that, what is it called? A runaway
train. Yeah.
Yes. It's like, did I need to spend 5 minutes talking about this that could have been done in 30 seconds? Like, come on. So yeah. Thank you.
Like, know how to read the room. And that is what's nice about video podcasts. Now I will say that because podcasts used to all be audio only and now it's all video, but the video is nice because you can feel someone's energy right away. And so it makes it easier to say, like, how much are we joking around? How serious are we being? Like, these are all the immediate thoughts that fire off.
I love that. It also makes for a better listening experience.
Yes.
Because we tend to be very judgmental when we listen to other people talk, and you're like, oh my God, this guy is just talking about himself the whole time. And it could be like, I'm thinking of a very specific, very well-known podcast that is one of my favorites. And I don't want to say the name because I love it so much that I feel bad that I'm speaking ill of it. But so I'm not going to say, I've decided, I'm not going to say the name. But
will you tell me after the show?
I totally will. And he's awesome. He has awesome guests. And when you have a guest, I feel like you really just want to hear what they have to say. And the host just asking these kind of probing questions to get the guest to continue to share. And this guy is always jumping in. He's like, well, when I do this, when I do that. And we're like, oh my God, we get it. You do this. Like, tell us later in a solo episode all the things that you do. I want to hear from them. Do you come across that at all?
Yes. And I will say, because this is a very meta episode, we're talking about podcast interviews during a podcast interview. I do want to say, like, the fact that I was like, tell me after the show, that is the fun part about being a guest. Like, Pua and I are going, like, she's going to spill the tea to me after the show, but it's not something that, we're going to put on air. Like, that's the magic of doing podcast guesting, is you build these relationships with people. So anyway, just wanted to pull back the curtain on what happened there.
Totally. We were talking earlier. I'm like, this is like Inception.
So yes, I do see that. And it is a balance, because there's this art to having it not be just Q&A, because a lot of podcast hosts get resentful after a while because they're like, oh, I'm letting the guests do all the talking, but it's my show. I'm paying to produce it, but I don't have any visibility. But then the pendulum swings so far in the other direction that the host is like, blah, 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 blah. And they're talking so much, and it becomes this weird power struggle. And so you got to find the balance of that pendulum where there's a healthy conversation. When I'm a guest, I want the host to talk. I want them to get as much value from this interview as possible, just like I'm getting value from it. But it can't be this weird, like, let me give like, it's an energetic thing. Like, it has to be a nice balance.
For sure. You are really good at putting periods at the end of your sentence.
Thank you.
I will say too, like, reading the pauses is something that it's like a skill that you kind of have to nurture through this.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who will like pause just long enough so that you think that they're done, and then you start talking and then they keep going.
Yeah.
That makes post-production real fun. Oh, we just did it.
I know. It's also really hard when you're just like very excited. It's not perfect.
Totally.
But I had this, I was on a podcast a week or two ago, and I will say this is something that's very difficult for speakers. A lot of times speakers, they speak from the stage. They have all this experience speaking. They're like, I'm going to do great. There are sometimes they have the hardest time with podcast interviews because they are used to commanding the entire stage. And then when they have to share the stage with a guest or with the host, they don't know how to do that. And I was on a show and the host is amazing and she's such a great speaker. And I gave an answer and I am good at putting the pauses, but she just jumped right in and it's like, give a beat. Because we kept kind of stepping on each other's toes a little bit. And it wasn't for lack of, a positive dynamic. It was just too jumping on the next sentence. It's like, you got to leave some space. Because the worst case scenario is that the editor deletes the blank space. They just delete the silence. But it's hard to add in the silence when you're talking right over.
Well, I mean, I don't think, can you even add silence if there's like two voices? I guess so. You can do anything, but yeah.
Makes it a little bit more challenging.
Totally. I really love this too, because it's a skill that I think is newer that many people are really honing that comes in handy in other spaces. Right? I feel like you have better conversations when you go to networking events or when you're leading a presentation and you have Q&A. Like those are all skills that I don't think we really realize are skills. And like I find that I tend to be more comfortable in front of, I do a lot of like Zoom presentations, and that used to be really uncomfortable because you can't read a room on Zoom the way that you can read a room in real life. But this allows you to pick up on cues that don't exist in real life, which is so crazy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I love also, I've talked to many people who are like, I'm not good on video. I don't do video, especially in the course creation space. It's like we have all of these things to share, but that block, that inner limitation of not liking what you look like or who you become when you're on video is really, really paralyzing for people. And to practice being on camera with someone where you're just having a recorded conversation, that to me is one of the greatest hacks to getting more comfortable on video. And a lot of people say like, oh, here's how you get comfortable. Go live on Facebook every day for 30 days and then you'll be fine. And it's like, that's just anxiety ridden because you're like, what am I going to talk about? Nobody's watching. Is it because I suck? But this is such a gentle way to practice that skill. Do you find that?
I totally agree. Because podcasts are on video, it's a great way to practice. And it's much easier to do video when you have another person that you're being interviewed by. When a lot of people are paralyzed, they just put up the camera and they don't even know what to say. And I do want to give a quick plug because one of my really good friends, one of my business besties is Carrie Murphy, and she is the queen of video. Like literally her specialty is in helping female entrepreneurs, exactly what you just said, get comfortable. I was just a guest on her podcast called Inspired Living. So y'all go in your podcast app. You're already in there. Go to look up Inspired Living with Carrie Murphy, Keri. Subscribe to the podcast because if you feel like you have a hard time on video, Carrie is the queen of video. She will help you.
Amazing. Thank you. So many people need that, truly.
Yeah, she'd be a great guest for your podcast, by the way. Happy to introduce you.
That'd be great. I would love to have her. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I don't know if I don't love video personally, but I love podcasting more than I don't love video.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this thing, right? Like, okay, I understand. I'm going to brush my hair. Like, we're going to make this work. We're going to make it as good as we can make it.
Yeah.
And enjoying the process and understanding that it's more than just about you is really the thing. Like, yes, you're uncomfortable, but you have a message to share. Don't hold that back from people because you can't get over this discomfort. So, anyway.
Yeah. And all different people consume content in many different ways. There are people that they go to YouTube when they want to learn something. If you're not on YouTube, if you don't have video content, they will never find you. Period. Now I'm literally adding periods to the end of my sentences. No, they will not find you. There are people that just go to podcasts to find content. Like one story that I like to share is I've been working out with a personal trainer for the last year. And before I decided to hire a personal trainer locally, I was looking at like health coaches and online programs. I was just going to look at all the options out there to get fit. And so people were like, oh, check out this person. And before I went to any of their websites, I looked them up to see if they'd done any podcasts. And if they had not done any podcasts, next the ones that had done podcasts, I binged multiple episodes of some of these women who were suggested, and it allowed me to really get to know them and get like one, I even filled out a contact form. I got into their sales funnel. It wasn't the right fit for me, but that's the point, is that if you are not visible on certain platforms, there's just going to be a segment of your target audience that just never finds you. And you may say, okay, fine with that. That's fine. But if you're trying to reach as many people as possible, kind of need to be visible in as many places as possible.
Absolutely. Do you find that that's equally true for both service-based business owners and product-based businesses?
That's a good question, because we typically work with service-based businesses because service-based businesses tend to have a higher lifetime value of a client. And so because podcast audiences are usually a lot smaller than, say, what you would get if you were running an ad, getting hundreds upon thousands of impressions and clicks, when you're on a podcast, maybe you have 100 people listening, 500, 1,000. It's a relatively small audience. And usually for a product, like a consumer product with a lower price point, you need a high volume of sales for it to really be worth the founder's time. And so there's obviously a lot of variables in there, but usually this is much better for service-based businesses. It also depends on what is the story and information, like what's the story behind the product and the business, and what do you have to teach? Like, for example, if someone's just selling like t-shirts, I don't really like it. What are you going to talk about? If you're selling like some type of health supplement, there's a lot of education around the product, then podcasts could be really good for that. So it just kind of depends.
Totally. And it might be a good differentiator if you are selling t-shirts, but your t-shirts are, every dollar you donate to some kind of charity, or, it's kind of creating content around that is a cool way for people to learn about it. Put it on your website, put it on your social. But yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting differentiator. Thinking about podcasts for conversion versus podcasts for the sake of like loving conversation. And because I know so many people who are great conversationalists and could talk about something forever and are not great at asking for a sale, having a call to action. It seems as if it's almost a wasted opportunity. What advice do you have for people who are really looking to kind of hone that in and say, okay, I'm really ready to continue having valuable conversations that actually lead me to something productive?
Yeah. I mean, you have to get over any fear you have around the call to action, because if you're doing podcast interviews as an entrepreneur, you love the conversation, but you're getting on shows in front of your target audience. Like, you do want to get clients from it. If you're not giving an effective call to action, you're not being strategic about it, you're kind of wasting your time. And I know that's a strong statement, because is it truly a waste of time if you have a great conversation and you make a new friend? No. But if you want to make the most of the opportunity, get over any fear you have about giving a call to action. And you're not selling. The call to action is not a sales pitch. It's giving more value. So when I give a call to action that says, come register for our free masterclass, I'm not selling anything. It's a free masterclass. Anyone who attends is going to get 3 hours of extremely high value from me. I mean, that's just a gift. That's like, you like this? Come get this. I have more. There's more where that came from. If I'm afraid to give a call to action because I don't know, and I don't tell them that, I'm withholding value. So don't withhold value from your dream clients, from your target audience. And if you're just not sure of what the strategy is, you're like, I don't know what to offer. Well, come to my free masterclass. I'll teach you all about how to make a call to action.
There it is.
Interviewconnections.com/live masterclass is where you can register. The link will be in the episode description.
Absolutely. We are going to link to all the things we've talked about. That's incredible. And I love the perspective of approaching it as a gift, because we love giving gifts. Like, when we think about like if podcasts were done in real life, and some are, how epic. I think we would all love to bring swag, or like, have a company shirt, or, whatever that is. Like, giving gifts is often people's love languages. And so if we think about a call to action as a gift for your audience versus a lead magnet, like those two things have such different energy. It's insane.
Yeah.
But they're essentially the same, right?
Exactly. Like I do sales calls, right, for my company. So I love learning about sales. I get targeted a lot with ads about sales, like follow-up scripts and here's how to handle this objection. I'm like, give it to me. I want the lead magnet. I want to know. That's valuable to me. Like, I don't feel like I'm being sold to. I'm like, I would get a lot of value from that. Like, yes, I want that. Yes. Like, what does your audience want? What do you have? What kind of information, what offer for free that do you have that they'd be like, yes, I want that. What is the yes, I want that for your audience that you could give them? So there's this clean energy of just like, this is for you, not like I'm sneakily trying to sell you something. Like, no, like what can you give them that has them say, yes, thank you. Here's my email.
Totally. It's like less about getting them into your funnel and more about providing value and then seeing what happens after, right?
Yes. Equal value exchange.
Beautiful. I love that. The other thing that I thought about as you were talking was if we come to an interview with the intention of having just like a friendly conversation, that could be so super valuable and awesome and fun. But it could also go the other way where the host, who is likely inviting you on as sort of an act of goodwill, paying for your interview to be edited, and then they may not get tons of value from something that you just kind of show up half-assed just for fun. Not that there's anything wrong with that if it's the right show, if it's the right audience. Mm-hmm. I think the audiences that we are talking to today are really looking for that equal exchange of value, to be able to share great stories, as you said. I love that. I love stories. I love teaching through stories. Storytelling is so powerful, which is so different from just showing up and having fun with your friend. Again, there's time and a place for that. I love those too. But yeah, it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. And especially for business owners and entrepreneurs, we're not comedians. We're not on entertainment podcasts. Like, typically the shows we're on are probably a little bit more boring than like listening to the most recent like pop culture news. Like, let's just be honest, like, but be entertaining. Like, I like to call it edutainment. I did not coin that term. I heard it somewhere along the way, but make it at least a little bit entertaining. People are typically listening audio only. They've got you on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So even though we've got video on right here, most people probably are not watching the video. And so add a little energy to your voice, like laugh, like make it fun. If people feel like they're a fly on the wall of a really fun conversation, they're going to enjoy listening to it a lot more.
Absolutely. I mean, I have smiled the entire episode so far. Like, you are a joy to talk to. So if you need if someone's listening, you're like, what's an example of a great guest? Just find us on YouTube and go watch it.
Thank you. Well, it makes it easy when you're a great host. Like, it really is co-creating an episode. I'm serious. I'm not just blowing smoke. Like, podcast interviews are co-created. Really good host and an average guest, same opposite. A really great guest, but a bad host. But two, like, equal value is...
Love it. I am so thankful that you are doing what you do, because people need the encouragement that you offer, the value that you offer, the services that you offer. All of it is incredibly valuable. It's, again, the unicorn of marketing, I think. If you're not wanting to pay for ads, or if you do and you're looking for another marketing channel, consider not just podcast guesting, but consider working with Jessica. I feel like you just probably make it very easy for people as well. Could you walk us through a little bit of your process?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have such an amazing team at Interview Connections. Whatever someone truly asks our differentiator, I mean, there's certainly many that I could give, but our team is incredible. Like, my business partner and I, we're 50-50 co-owners. She's our CEO. We had a meeting yesterday with our leaders, and we just walk away. We're like, wow, our team's awesome. Like, we don't need to exert power. They're just like, yeah, we're doing this. And we're like, great. Like, sounds awesome. Like, our team is just awesome. So yeah, we love working with entrepreneurs who feel like the best kept secret, who want to leverage podcast experiences, but do not want to spend all their time researching, pitching, following up, and actually getting booked. They need some guidance on what's the call to action. What should my topics be? I don't know what types of podcasts I should be a guest on. We implement it for you. We're done for you agency. We have coaching calls. We do interview audits. It's an amazing program. So if you're interested in learning more, you can book a free consultation call to see if it's a good fit. I do very low pressure sales. Like, it's truly, let's see if this is a good fit for you. Let's see if you're a good fit for us. If yes, awesome. If no, no worries. So if you want to find out, you can go to interviewconnections.com to book a call. And I don't normally give 2 calls to action, but I did mention our masterclass. So you could go to interviewconnections.com/live masterclass and register for a free 3-day workshop with me.
Amazing. That is incredibly valuable. We'll link both of those in the show notes. And I want to thank you. Thank you for doing what you do in the world, for showing up the way that you do, and for joining me today. This has been so fun.
Thank you. I also thought it was very fun. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Any last tidbits to share with our audience today before we close?
Thank you for listening. I hope you all had as much fun as we did.
Me too. I second that for sure. Amazing. We'll be in touch.
All right.